Shiva. Good afternoon and thank you for participating in this interview. You often say that at a certain point in your life you realize that big corporations trying to take control over the food cycle changed your life. What marked your decision and your motivation to work on this issue?
In 1984, in India we had two huge tragedies. One was the Bhopal tragedy, where a pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide leaked and killed thousands. And in Punjab we had the rise of extremist violence, and the army was sent to the sacred shrine of the Sikhs. 30,000 people were killed in both tragedies. That is like 12 9/11s. And it shook me. And I wasn't involved in studying agriculture, but this forced me to ask, why is agriculture so violent? Particularly given that the chemical agriculture was given a Nobel Peace Prize under the name of the Green Revolution. So I studied the Green Revolution. I wrote a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution, which then started to get me invited to conferences relating to food and agriculture. There was a particular conference in 1987 on the new biotechnologies. And the old chemical industry was there, now talking about the future of how they wanted to patent the seed, but the only way to claim a patent through claiming an invention was through genetic engineering, which they hadn't evolved. Universities had evolved it, but they were now taking ownership of this. And through the ownership of the tools, they were taking ownership of life on Earth. They also talked about how the European and American market was too small for them, and they had to have a global market. They needed an intellectual property rights agreement, which then became the trade-related intellectual property rights agreement of WTO. And when I heard them, it really sent a chill through me. As we've had slavery before, but never have we had a slavery that is so total that it includes enslavement of all life, as well as all farmers who are not allowed to save and exchange seed. A patent, on the one hand, is a claim to invention, and when it comes to life and plants and seeds, it's a false claim, but it is also a way to prevent farmers from saving and exchanging seed, which is now defined as an intellectual property crime. And that's what threw me immediately into the deep ocean of seed saving. I'm still swimming in it. All I knew is it was ethically, scientifically wrong, legally wrong for these corporations to have cooked up patenting of life. I knew that saving seed was one way to keep life free. But in the process over the years, what saving seeds has done is taught us that actually there's nothing wrong with our old seeds. The only problem is they haven't been evolved for chemicals. And in a world where we are waking up to the fact that chemical fertilizers are bad, pesticides are bad, in fact this is the time to bring back native seeds in their evolutionary capacity as the center of food.
Dobbiamo rivedere quindi il nostro modo di pensare alle risorse.
I think we have to reconceptualize everything that is a legacy of a mechanistic worldview and industrial system of production. The industrial system of production is based on fossil fuels. That's what industrialism is about. It hides the high cost of production in agriculture. You need 10 units of energy put into an industrial agriculture system to get 1 unit of food out of it. No system can sustain itself. That's why the non-sustainability of industrial farming. But the productivity calculus, which keeps saying we're producing more food, is with respect to an input. Productivity is output per unit input. In terms of output, biodiversity is not being counted. All the wonderful plants around us, which are wild, uncultivated, but they are food, their destruction is not counted. Biodiversity in our fields is not counted. Monocultures are counted, but monocultures are counted in terms of how much commodity do they produce. So you lose the output of diversity, And in terms of input, the only thing that's counted is labor. Now, labor is not an input. Human beings are autonomous, creative beings. They are not a raw material into a process. They create, but they create throughout an ecological process. And I increasingly say, creative work and meaningful work is an outcome of a good agriculture system, just as much as fertile soils can't be reduced to dead matter, can't be reduced to land as an input. Fertile soils, biodiversity, water, atmosphere, reducing greenhouse gases are all outcomes of a good system. So we've got to get rid of two big myths of industrial farming. One that goes with the larger structure of capitalist industrialism, which is capital creates, nature and people are dead. No. Nature and people are creative, they can't be reduced to land and labor. We are not just labor sold to somebody else. We are ultimate creative beings as part of a creative universe. And land is not a commodity. Our labor is not a commodity. Land is all of nature's potential in all her diversity. Capital, in fact, doesn't create anything. And it's interesting to give this mysterious power to money. Money was replaced by the word capital. And capital, of course, has Latin roots. It meant caput. But in those days, it was the real goats in the farm. It was the real heads of cattle, the real heads of chicken. It was head, the heads of animals that you own. Now, money has been made capital, a mysterious creative force, and those who own it can own all of the earth and take away life and creativity from people and the earth. That's the shift we need to make, because those false constructions that have then led to other constructions like corporations having intellectual property rights when they steal from nature or people, those constructions are now really destroying the planet and destroying human life. They have become ecocidal and genocidal. So if we have to escape from that ecocide and genocide, we have to revisit these categories which are made to look like they're rock on the ground. They are Moses's, 10 commandments carried on stone. No, they're fictions created out of perverse minds.
Qual è la relazione fra queste categorie e un pensiero maschile nel creare questa visione meccanicista?
Men and women are part of humanity. Humanity is part of the earth. And we are all creative in the same way. But women's creativity has that added role of looking after sustenance, taking care of children, giving birth to children, taking care. They shape an economy of caring and sharing. We had brilliant scientists in Italy, like Leonardo da Vinci, who gave us a science of participation and an ecological science, not a science of domination. It was in England that the science of domination and exploitation as a masculine science was created. Bacon wrote a book called The Birth of Masculine Time. And in this he talks about how men are going to be supermen with tools of exploitation that come out of raping the earth, because gentle working with the earth doesn't let you have her secrets. It's only a violent relationship. And from that you will establish an empire of man over nature. That is a very specific culture. I would not make it essential to men. I would not make it essential to humanity. And that error that has been made, which has served exploitation very well, which has led to this huge concentration of wealth in some hands and poverty at every other level and ecological destruction, that culture is not a culture. As Gandhi said, what do you think of Western civilization? He said, it would be a good idea, basically meaning that it would be good if that predatory colonizing West could become civilized. And civilization in that terms means knowing that we are part of diversity where every being has intrinsic worth, every human being should get equal respect.
Che cosa nella sua formazione l'ha aiutata a fare il lavoro che fa, a lottare nel modo in cui lotta?
I think there are two streams of training that have helped me a lot. One is my training in physics, and the biotech industry is desperate to prove I didn't study physics. They keep removing my physics degrees from Wikipedia as if that can take away what I have learned.
It's in there, I checked this morning.
It's back again?
It's back again.
Okay. The fact that I very consciously chose to study quantum physics and then went in to study the foundations of quantum theory to understand the real meaning. What does this leap out of mechanistic thought mean? What has helped me in my work is the recognition that everything is connected. My thesis was on non-locality and non-separability in quantum theory. Even in physics, we know everything is connected. At this point, biology, which is about connection, shouldn't be going to a physics of 100 years old. It's such an error. The second thing that quantum theory teaches us is there aren't fixed things. Newton had to construct this idea of God making the world as immutable particles that can't be changed. Now, creation made a very living world that's constantly changing and evolving and adapting, and the world is potential. It is not fixed things. So the idea of potential is at the heart of quantum theory. And having learned that, I realize when I plant a seed which might be that small, in it is the potential of the tree that it's going to become. In it is the potential of a crop that's going to feed us. But it also recognizes that every person has potential. And we make people behave stupid or smart according to what feedback we give. I know there are schools that give different blazers to kids according to the grades they get. But the grades they get depend partly on the food they eat. If you're eating poisons, your brain functioning is going to be harmed. It's wrong to essentialize stupidity into human beings when stupidity is a result of the environment of which we are a part. It's not intrinsic to us. And linked with this is the fact that when we have potential, you can go this way or that. When it's fixed, it's just going to sit there. Now, the options of potentials gives you an indeterminism. Out of that comes the idea of free will. That it's up to me to shape the context of my potential, the potential of that blade of grass, the potential of the community of which I am a part, and the potential of the entire earth through the actions I take. So uncertainty probably. And the other very, very beautiful learning from quantum theory, that the mechanistic world was about either and or. You're either a particle or a wave. No. In quantum theory, you can be both. But the other teaching I received was both from nature, the fact that I grew up in the forests of the Himalaya, as well as the later teachings from the Chipko women who came out to say, we're going to hug the trees and you'll have to kill us before you kill the trees. I learned so much of my ecological teachings from there, including the teachings of biodiversity, of ecological interconnectedness, and the stream of interconnectedness from quantum theory, combined with the stream of interconnectedness in ecology. And these streams are what have stood by me. The beauty of it is that what they provide is principles. And those principles work in every context. So I was able to do a study for our Ministry of Environment to show that calcium rocks in the mountains, which were being valued only for their mineral value, which was expressed when the stone was taken out of the hills, that stone was a water reservoir, it was an aquifer. And the water and the limestone were connected. And as long as the mountain had the limestone, it provided water. Water provided irrigation and economy. And we were able to show that leaving the limestone in the hill provided a bigger economy. Those were the kinds of derived works that then led to so much of what I've done, including the more recent work we've done on shifting the calculation from yield of commodities in agriculture, which is not bringing food to people, to measuring nutrition per acre and wealth per acre. We call it health per acre and wealth per acre. All of it comes from those two streams. And the two streams taught me one more lesson, that my PhD in physics was not higher than the learning of the women in the forest. They had not been to school. And so it taught me humility. It taught me respect. It taught me to take everyone's knowledge into account.
A 20 anni dal summit di Rio, che bilancio possiamo fare di quel che è successo da allora ad oggi?
The Earth Summit in Rio in 1992 was created with the convergence of new ecological science that was teaching us about how the climate is getting disrupted, that was teaching us about how species are being pushed to extinction, and the convergence of the ecological movement. That power forced the world to wake up, and we got two treaties legally binding, the Convention on Biological Diversity as well as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was necessary that all of these treaties become part of one treaty, the Montreal Protocol on Ozone. All of it become one, and the demand was made at Rio, let us have a UN environmental agency, because all we have is a UN environmental program in Nairobi. The rich countries said, no, there's no money in the world, we can't create a new institution. 3 years later, they create the World Trade Organization, undermining everything in those two treaties. The first thing they undermined was the Convention on Biodiversity, which was supposed to be about the duty to protect diversity. Now you had handed over to the Monsantos of the world the right to own species and wipe them out. So our food base has reduced from 8,000 species of plants to 8 commodities that are traded and 4 that are genetically modified. The globalization of trade, called free trade, which is very unfree trade, ended up creating more fossil fuels, adding food miles, destroying local economies, and the climb in greenhouse gases went up. But not only did you undo the climate treaty, you undid did the power of the international community through the UN to act, because now the corporations who had emitted more fossil fuel, used more fossil fuel, emitted more, now were bigger giants than countries. And today, what the free trade structure has given us is corporate rule of the most brutal kind, of the most undemocratic kind. The newly negotiated treaty called TTIP is an example where corporations now want to be called citizens, can have the right to sue governments if they don't hand over the economy. They want to invade into local economies and national economies. There is clauses on procurement. After all, how do systems work? A municipality runs a school. A municipality decides it will feed the children, good, healthy, organic. These kind of free trade treaties say, no, Pepsi should bring junk food. And then they'll reduce the sugar a little bit when we find out how junk food is the source of pushing 2 billion people on the planet to disease. So at one level, free trade has undone all the commitments made under the UN treaties. But in these 20 years, people have become much more aware, both about the planet of which we are a part, and the discussion is so much richer. That time it was about the environment as if something outside. Today it's about the rights of Mother Earth. It's about us being the earth, us being the biodiversity, us being the water. There is no division. That maturing couldn't have happened without the crisis that a globalized corporate economy would have put. The second thing that's happened is, even while the treaties themselves have been weakened, people's actions have become stronger. So everywhere we are now finding examples of how biodiversity produces more food. It was not on the agenda of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I did work very hard to put biosafety on the agenda under 19.3, worked with the governments who became aware there's new biotechnology, let's regulate it. In terms of climate change, all the new work that's being done on how organic farming and local economies can undo the damage. While we demand the end of a fossil fuel age, we also have at the level of every school, every garden, every home, every community, every farm. Solutions that citizens can start initiating. So the possibility of a bottom-up alternative has grown stronger.
Quali sono le priorità allora in questa lotta, in queste azioni globali, in particolare rispetto alla sovranità alimentare e al ruolo dei contadini e nel contrastare questa privatizzazione della vita?
Food sovereignty rests on seed sovereignty because everything begins in seed. And the food system is being controlled through the seed. Whether it was the Green Revolution where varieties were bred to respond to chemicals, or now genetically engineered seeds which are bred to help chemical companies sell more chemicals. But also they are sold in order to take a claim of owning the seed and therefore collecting royalties. So the first priority for peasants is to liberate themselves from seed colonialism and seed imperialism. That's why I've built Navdanya and worked on this for 30 years. That's why we built the global campaign on seed freedom, that farmers must have the freedom to not just save and exchange seed, but to continue the work they've done. 99.9% breeding was done by farmers. How can we come into 2014 and say only corporations breed on the basis of uniformity? Uniformity is a wrong principle in times of climate change. It was always wrong in terms of the quality and nutrition of food. You might have the same variety, but each leaf will be slightly different, each grain will be slightly different. It'll be distinctive from other varieties, but just like you and your family will be different from other families, but no two children will be clones of each other. That diversity of expression is vital to the unfolding of life and freedom. That counts for the seed and it counts for farming families. The second is we will not have food sovereignty if money is flowing out of peasant families for chemicals and costly patented seed. This is what we've seen grow in India as the crisis of debt. Every new chemical is brought in the name of helping farmers. Every new GM seed is brought in the name of helping farmers. Basically, they're sucking wealth out of rural areas. So we need an ecological agriculture. And for all the people who start feeling afraid, but how will we feed the world, we now have enough data. Our own work in India, the UN agencies, UNEP, UNCTAD, FAO, everyone, agencies that are free of corporate influence, recognize that ecological agriculture is the only way to go forward to increase food production. And it's the only way to increase rural incomes, therefore remove poverty. So the solutions to hunger, poverty, and the ecological crisis are ecological agriculture as the ground for food sovereignty and seed adapting constantly, evolving in diversity as the foundation of that food sovereignty.
Come incoraggiamo i bambini, chi partecipa ai processi educativi, a promuovere questa diversità?
Well, the first thing about education is the education system that came out of the colonizing British Isles was based on what they call 3 R's, which is already a beginning of mistake because it's reading, writing, which is a W, and arithmetic, which is an A. So it began with an error, and then it's imposed an error of learning on everyone. For children, the first teacher must be nature, and therefore they must be exposed to nature. I think every school should have a garden where the soil and the seed teaches children about the living processes of the earth and allows them to experience being part of it, rather than the kind of teaching where they're afraid of dirt, they're afraid of grass, because they've lived in these absolutely insulated surroundings. They also learn their creative power. The miracle of planting 1 tomato seed and getting 1,000 seeds is a lesson in abundance that every child should know in a culture where we are always being made afraid of scarcity. The second thing that needs to be done with our education is our cultures are rich. But a global economy must make them look primitive. all colonizings have been based on creating barbarians. And our indigenous cultures, whether it be Italy with all her diversity or it be India with all her diversity, once again there's a new creation of the barbarian. It is time to teach our children through our mothers and grandmothers, our grandfathers, great-grandfathers, great-grandmothers, and that's why we run a grandmother's university at Navdanya. And the third thing, of course, is recognizing that the world cannot live off degrees in management, biotechnology and information technology, which are the only three higher education degrees being promoted. We need the arts, we need creativity, we need young people to aspire for their potential from what they want to be. If they want to be a poet, let them be a poet. If they want to be a gardener, let them be a gardener. If they want to be a carpenter, let them be a carpenter. Don't force three impoverished trainings which will leave the majority of young people out. But everyone will be in the run to become a manager, an IT professional, and a biotech scientist. There is so much diversity in the world, and the children need to have the possibility to explore all of that diversity, to feel at home with themselves as they grow.
Cosa si augura che succeda in Italia su questo fronte domani mattina?
I think Italy on Monday morning is the Italy of Sunday morning. It's an Italy that must stay proud and resilient about the very, very rich culture of Renaissance it gave to the world. Very different from the industrial civilization or non-civilization that has been imposed on the world. Italy has given to the world an articulation of another food paradigm. India too has very rich culture, but we haven't articulated it. I do my little bit. But in Italy, it is the entire society that realizes food is about quality, not about quantity. Food is about diversity and not about uniformity. Food is about community and not about fast food. And the slow food movement has grown here because of that unique contribution. As a newspaper, Repubblica, said the other day, the Italian style should not be reduced to handbags. It should be in Italy's farms, in Italy's communities, and in Italy's kitchens. And we are at the stage where the global junk food and poison food industry that can only destroy the planet and health is fighting its last gasp, imposing GMOs, imposing junk food, trying to threaten every country to say you can't have an agriculture and food system that takes care of your local biodiversity, builds a food system on that, brings knowledge and celebration through it, and builds local economies and freedom and sovereignty through it. That last gasp of a defeated and failed system should not be allowed to become the dominant form in Italy. This is Italy's moment to have the renaissance of the future. Much biodiversity talk.
Okay, we're done.
Il 2015 sarà l'anno del suolo.
The year of the soil is a very deep opportunity. First, it's an opportunity to remember that we are the soil and the soil is us. To remember ourselves once more as participants in an earth community and not masters and conquerors of the earth. And that is undoing the damages of 500 years of colonialism, 300 years of industrialism, 50 years of corporate rule. All of those three need to be put behind. The second opportunity it gives us is to recognize all those tremendous microorganisms in the soil, all these earthworms that are giving us these molds, giving us soil fertility, much more productive than a fertilizer factory ever can be. We don't need fertilizer factories. We don't need chemicals that kill the soil and then kill the oceans and give us dead zones and give us nitrates and become pollutants, because the earth has all of this biodiversity. So it is an opportunity to become aware at a planetary level of the biodiversity in the soil and how it sustains us, and more importantly, how we have a duty to sustain it. The soil is the only place where human beings can enter directly in service of the earth. Every other process of ecology is too big for us. But when we save an earthworm, and we make a vermicompost, and we use this mold, and Darwin said that when the history of humanity is written, the earthworm will be recognized as the species that sustained humanity. But the third, very, very important contribution we can make in the year 2015 is recognizing that in our languages, in the Latin language, in the Indian language, there is no difference between soil and earth. For you it's terra, for us bhumi, vasundhara, dharati, it's all one. It's the Western Anglo-Saxon culture that call the earth dead matter and the soil an empty container for pouring chemicals into it. We are the soil is alive, and through the soil is where humanity will build its future freedom. Its future freedom of identity at the level of the local territory, economy at the level of the local living economy, democracy and freedom by participating in shaping our future.
Grazie.